otra vez preguntando. Okay, well, thank you very much. Today we're gonna show how to we're gonna show an example how to manually adjust Web2Cit configuration for a specific web page. If you want to know further about further details about how to do this, we have uploaded a separate video, more theoretical, but this is going to be a hands-on video. So to get started, let me share my screen. Just one second. Okay, so to do this, I'm going to show a proposed workflow. So the first step would be to identify a target URL, that is a URL that you want to extract metadata for which Citoid is not getting the metadata appropriately, correctly. When I say Citoid, I'm referring to the Wikipedia automatic citation generator. So to do this, we can, let me switch my tabs here, just one second. So to do this, you can find a website yourself that you're having trouble with, but you can also refer to the list of problematic URLs that we have been collecting in the Web2Cit project. This is a list where we are collecting URLs and what the expected output for those URLs should be. That is, what the title, the author's names, the date, and the publishing date, and where it was published and by whom. This data, what we are expecting that Citoid should return, and what Citoid is actually returning at the moment. So, for example, in this example, we're going to be working with this URL that has been included here. And as you can see, it is...
Diego, I think it's not showing the URL. Can you move a little bit more? Yeah.
Oh,
no,
okay.
It's because you're not, like, you need to move on the spreadsheet.
But you see my screen, right?
Yeah, we're seeing your screen.
Okay. Oh, okay, here is the URL. I'm sorry.
Yeah, there.
Perfect. I'm gonna zoom in a little bit. So this is the URL, and here it says that Citoid should get a newspaper, that this URL is a newspaper article. Here it says what the title should be. In this case, the person that has filled in the problematic URL spreadsheet stated that we shouldn't have an author for this article because it is an article that has been published by the newspaper without an author name. This is the publishing date that Citoid should return, and Citoid should say that this was published in El Observador, which is the name of the newspaper. However, and we're going to check this now in Wikipedia, apparently Citoid is not returning exactly this information. For example, it says that it is a web page instead of a newspaper article. Apparently the title is being returned correctly, but the author, it is returning an author name when it actually shouldn't, and actually the author name is wrong. It isn't returning a publishing date, and so on. So it seems that we have identified a URL that we're having trouble with. And to check this in
Yeah, and also in case you are wondering where this spreadsheet is, it's on the main page on Web2Cit. And if you are having trouble doing any of the steps that Diego will show you next, you can also upload the information to the spreadsheet if you are unable to use any of the documentation for early adopters, and you will still be helping us with the project, because that way we can actually test some of the URLs for different languages. So in any case, you can still help us by filling this URL that, again, you can find in the meta page of Web2Cit. That was my comment.
Exactly. And by the way, and this is because we are recording this after we recorded the theoretical video that I mentioned before. So maybe I'm forgetting to add some details. All of what we are going to be showing today is explained in detail, not only in the theoretical video, but also in a guideline for early adopters that you can also find in the meta page for Web2Cit. Just as a side note, in case, I'm not sure we added that as a resource. So if you can check that, Evelyn, and add it, thank you. So This is the programmatic URL we got from the spreadsheet, but let's check this in Wikipedia. So this is the Wikipedia sandbox. You can do this in whatever Wikipedia article. So I'm gonna edit the web page visually, and I'm gonna try and insert a citation for this web page that the spreadsheet says we're having trouble with. So by the way, this is in this tab here we have the, oh, sorry, just let me move.
You mute yourself by accident.
Sorry, when I moved the bar around, I muted myself. I'm sorry. So here's the website that apparently we're having trouble with. I'm gonna move this around here. Okay, so this is the URL. I'm gonna copy it, and I'm here in the Wikipedia editor. I'm gonna say that I want to insert a citation. I'm gonna copy the URL here. Okay, and I click generate. So Wikipedia tries to generate the citation automatically using Citoid. And as the spreadsheet says, we're having trouble with this because the title was retrieved correctly. It is this part here, but Citoid says it is a website, and we are expecting that it is a newspaper article instead. We're getting the name of the newspaper as the name of the author, and actually it's doing something weird here because it is separating the two parts of the newspaper name into a first name and last name. This is not correct, and we didn't want an author name anyways. As we said before, we don't have a publishing date, we only have a retrieved date, so the publishing date is missing, and the publisher, apparently it is being retrieved correctly. So this is the first step of this proposed workflow. Second step is, let's confirm that Web2Cit is also returning an unexpected result for this URL. So as long as nobody has configured, as we explained in detail in the other video, as long as nobody has configured a series of templates for this domain, then Citoid Web2Cit should just return what Citoid is returning for this URL. Just let's check this. So to get the Web2Cit results for this URL, what we do is we prepend to the URL we are trying to get the citation automatically. We prepend the Citoid translation server address. This is https://web2cit.toolforge.org/ and after the translation server URL, we include the URL for which we want a Web2Cit translation. So we click on generate. Let's see what happens here. And well, as expected, because we have not defined any translation templates for this domain, Web2Cit is just returning the same results that Citoid was returning. So we have completed step 2 of our proposed workflow. We have confirmed that Web2Cit also is returning unexpected results for this URL. So third step is we will write, following an approach that is known in the programming world as a test-driven approach. We will first write the test for, and when I say the test, I mean the expected results for this URL. We will write this first, and after writing this test, we will write the translation template. So let's write the test for this URL. To get started, let's go to the early adopters guideline. This is the resource that I mentioned was available in the Web2Cit meta page. I'm gonna move this here. Okay, so let's go to the tests section, the tests.json section. As we have explained in the video, in the theoretical video, these files are located in a storage for Web2Cit, which is available also in Meta. And we have some examples. So I'm going to open the example that we have for the tests file. This is for a different domain. Let's write the tests file for the domain that we're currently working on. And as we explained in the early adopters guideline, to do that, what we have to do is use the domain and write the path inverting the hierarchy. That is, we start with the top level domain, and then we go from left to right, further down in the hierarchy. So let's copy this.
Yeah, and
here.
in case you have doubts, you can see that in the example already, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the example has been written for the domain blog.qagoma.qld.gov.au. In this case, where we want to write the tests for this other domain, we start with UI, then /com/el observador/www. And again, this is we are doing the walkthrough here. We're not going into the details. If you want to know the details, please watch the separate video. So
yeah, and also taking into account that probably the example that Diego just shared from .au.gov might not be the most like typical example that you will find in a URL. So that's the reason why you have to like do it the other way around.
So in this case, because we have tried to record these videos previously, but because of internet connection trouble, we had to stop. We actually started writing this example, but let's just ignore this. If nobody had written this before, then you will find a blank page here. And as with any Wikipedia or meta page, you will just have a button to create a new page. In this case, we will edit the page and we will replace the contents. So because we will be writing this in as a JSON file, I would recommend that you wrap the configuration file that you will be written around this syntax highlight tags. That's gonna make then when we save the page and someone opens it to see and review it, it's gonna be shown with a JSON format instead of as if it has been written using just plain wiki text. So I would recommend that you write your configuration within this syntax highlight tags. So, and because as we have explained in a separate video, editing JSON files can be quite cumbersome. We suggest that you write them using YAML instead, and then convert it to JSON using a YAML to JSON converter. So let's go to this YAML to JSON converter here, and let's start writing this tests file. As it is shown in the early adopters guideline, the test file is a series of test objects. So an array of test objects in YAML that would be test1, test2, and so on. In this case, we're going to be writing just one test because we have just one web page. And the test object, as it is explained in the guideline, includes a path to the test web page and a goals object. So back in the editor here, we have path, and we will also have goals.
Yeah,
Okay.
and also it might be a good moment for those of you who weren't able to see the previous video or do not want to see the other video, why is it that you're using YAML rather than JSON directly? Maybe 2 minutes.
Yeah, you can use JSON directly, but sometimes manually editing JSON is so complicated that I don't even dare doing that. I'd rather just write YAML before and then convert it to JSON. As we have mentioned, I think in that video, we currently have a Fabricator task where we say that we would like a Web2Cit to natively support YAML so that you can just save the configuration file as YAML and you don't have to convert it to JSON. But for the meantime, this is the way how it has to be done. But maybe in the future, you will just save it as YAML. So the path is the path to the website and that we're using as a test. And you don't have to include here, actually, you must not include here the domain. So the domain has already been included when in the path to the configuration file. Here we will just include the path of the website within the domain, which is this last part after the domain, including the leading slash. So here we write the path. By the way, one of the advantages of YAML is that you don't have to write your string within double quotes. You can do it, but you can also not do it, and that saves some characters. And here we will write our goals object. And the goals object, as I just explained in the guidelines, is a series of key value properties where the key is the field name and the value is the output that we are expecting for that field name. So let's do that. Here we have the goals object, and the goals object will have an item type property, and we expect that Web2Cit returns newspaper article for that item type property. And again, if you want to know more about how to write this, just check the guidelines or check the previous video. In this case, okay, so these values for the item type, you can check what are the supported values in our early adopters guideline. So next key would be the title. In this case, the title was this part here of the article. Let's just copy paste it here. Then for the author last names and author first names, remember we were not expecting any results. We can either leave this empty, or we can explicitly say that for author last, we want to have an empty array of last names. And for author first, we want to have an empty array of last names as well. As usual, if you want to state that something is empty or null, sometimes it's better to explicitly say so, because otherwise someone might go there and think that you forgot to add this. Here, we explicitly are saying we want authors to be empty. And we continue with the publishing date. In this case, in this article, the publishing date is down here. It says in Spanish, 14th of January 2022. Again, if you check the early adopters guideline, you will see how we expect the format that each field type should have for the date. If I go to that section here, this is here in the translation field section, you have the field name date, and the expected formats are one of these three. In this case, because we have date, month, and year, we will use this format. It is expecting 4 digits for the date, followed by a dash, 2 digits for the month, followed by another dash, and 2 digits for the day. So I'm gonna write these in the tests file. So we're expecting 2022, January 14, right? That was it? Yeah. Okay. And finally, we have our published in field. And we expect the published in field to be the name of the newspaper, El Observador. Okay, so here, this converter has automatically converted the YAML configuration file we have created into a JSON configuration file. And before we save this to Meta, we can check if the JSON configuration file is in the appropriate format. And again, as we have explained in the separate video, we have a supporting tool for this. So if we go to the tests.json section of our early adopters guideline, you will find a link to a JSON schema. And this you will find for all the configuration files. So if I open this link to this JSON schema, you find this schema, and this schema is a tool to help us validate the JSON configuration file. So I can copy this schema to a JSON validator. I'm using this one, JSON schema validator.net. Again, you can find other validators in the early adopters guideline. In this example, I copy in the left side the schema, which is going to help us validate a JSON file. And to the right, we're going to copy the JSON file that has been generated by the YAML to JSON converter. So I go here, I copy this to the clipboard, I paste it here, and if everything's right, then here the web page is going to tell us that no errors have been found and that the JSON is validating correctly against the schema for the tests.json file. So because the validation has passed, then I can just paste the JSON configuration file to the meta storage and save the file. We have explained, here we have a problem because apparently the YAML converter converted the date into a date format. We don't want these parts, yeah? Just because that wouldn't be supported. The supported format is year, month, date, and that's it. Okay, so I save it again. As we have explained in a separate video, even though I suggest that we, oh, sorry, I closed the tab instead of switching to it. Even though we suggest that you write the test configuration file before writing the template, right now, this is actually of no use because Web2Cit does not yet support these test configuration files. But in the future it will, and I think it is a good practice to do it this way. We first write our expected output, and after we have written our expected output, we go ahead and write the template that will get Web2Cit, that will make Web2Cit return an output, which is the output that was expected. So the fourth step, we write a template for the target URL. So to do that, we go again to our early adopters guideline. We go to the templates.json file section, sorry. And here we will have the explanation about how we should write this templates.json file. So again, we can just go to the tests file we have just written. And of course, the domain is going to be the same one. We don't have to change this. But in this case, we're not working on the tests.json file, but on the templates.json file. Okay, in this case, nobody has created this file before, so we go ahead and create one. As we said before, we will want to wrap this configuration within syntax highlight tags. We can find the tag right here. And because this is not an HTML, but a JSON file instead, we just replace this HTML with a JSON here, okay? So let's go ahead and write the configuration file. And again, we write it in YAML because it's easier than writing it in JSON. And as it says in the early adopters guideline, the templates.json file is a series of, let me switch here, it's a series of templates, template 1, template 2, and so on. We're going to write just one template now. And the template object has 3 properties, a path, a label, and a fields property. I'm going to write those down here. Path, label, fields. The path is the path to the template web page, which again is the same one than the one we used for the test web page, is this one here. Let's paste it. The label is an optional field that helps us understand why we are writing a separate template for this web page. It's optional. Let's write it anyway. So we will call this nota web page. Nota is article in Spanish.
Yeah, like article. Yeah.
Okay, no. Thank you. Nota, notes, exactly. Let's go to the fields object. The early adopters guideline says that that the fields property is a series of fields objects. So here's field 1, field 2, and so on. And the guidelines say that each of these objects have 3 properties: a field name, a required, and a fields this is wrong, sorry, and a procedures, we have to change this, and a procedures property. So let's go here and let's edit our first field object. We said we had a field name property, a required property, and a procedures property. The field name is the name of the field we're working with. Let's start with our item type field. Required is whether we want to make sure that this field returns a valid output for the template to be an applicable template. Again, we're not going to go into details about this, just refer to our separate video if you want to know more. In this case, because the item type is a mandatory field, it is always going to be required no matter what we put here. So here it's the same if we say true or false. Let's just write true. And procedures is a list of procedures objects. Again, this would be procedures 1, procedures 2, and so on. In this case, we are going to write just one procedure. And in the guidelines, if we check the guidelines here, a procedure object has two properties, a selections and a transformations property. Let's write those down. Selections and transformations. All right. And the selections object, the selections property, sorry, is an array of selection objects. So this would be, we would have here selection 1, and here we would have selection 2, and so on. And according to the guideline, a selection object has two properties, a type property and a configuration property. So let's write those down for our first selection, type and config. Okay, so we're working now on the item type field. And we saw that Citoid was returning website, and we wanted it to return newspaper article for this web page. In the article, we probably have nowhere in the article we will find something that tells us that this is a newspaper article. But pretty securely, we can presume that for all web pages in the El Observador domain, all web pages will be newspaper articles, because this domain is for a newspaper. The El Observador is a newspaper. So here we can use a fixed selection step.
And you might be wondering, what would be the contrary case, right? And so, for example, can you give an example of something that might have newspaper article, but it's not a newspaper?
So, sorry?
Like, I'm trying to think an example of something that would be a newspaper article that is not inside a newspaper.
Well, I cannot think of an example right now, but it might happen that in the same domain you have, for example, blog post, which is an item type, and you may also have, I don't know, maybe another type of source. Maybe it is a journal article, and they all living in the same domain. In those cases,
I'm thinking the closest that we have to that is probably all the UNESCO, UN, like international agencies of the sort. And in the previous video, Diego explained a lot about why we are taking subdomains too in the Web2Cit, and this is a reason why.
Yeah, but not only subdomains, because you can have in the same domain, you can have different item types. So in those cases, those would be the cases where you could, for example, write separate templates, or if you could tell those cases from the URL path, then you can use URL path groups, which is also something that we explained in the separate video.
Yeah, and so for example, if instead of nota, it would have something else there, right? Like at the path, you would identify that as being different. Yeah.
Exactly, and in those cases, because it is in the URL path, you can separate it. You can create translation subgroups for the same domain using URL path groups. There are many ways to achieve the same goal. Like, for example, you could also find that information in the HTML. Like, for example, you know that if the HTML has had a specific node, you would know it is a newspaper article, and if you didn't have it, then you would know it is a blog post. Then you can use that node as a selection and then use a special transformation. But like, you have different ways to approach the same thing. Probably you would have some use cases where some options would apply and some other use cases where some other options would apply. But in this case,
a little bit of a deviation, but yes, let's go back to the.
In this case, we are going to use a fixed selection step. And for the fixed selection step, the configuration is the value that we want the step to always return. So in this case, we want it to always return newspaper article. And that's going to be the only selection step that we are going to be configuring for this web page, for this template. And for the transformations, we don't want any transformation to be applied to this selection output because newspaper article is already the output that we want. So we want to apply just an empty array of transformations, and we indicate this like this. We enter a pair of square brackets. This way we are telling Web2Cit that we want to apply no transformations to the output of this selection step. Okay, so we go ahead with the next field. Let me just quickly check the JSON output to make sure that I'm not making any mistakes. I think I'm okay. Anyway, we're going to validate this in the end. So let's go with the next field. We go with our title. This is also a mandatory field. So again, no matter what we write here, it's always going to be true. We can write here false as well, because this is a mandatory field. This is always going to be a required field. Let's create our procedures property. So remember, the procedures is an array of procedure objects. The procedure object has a selections property and a transformations property. And in this case, we go back to our Wikipedia sandbox here. The title that Citoid was returning was correct. So in this case, we can just use the Citoid response. We can recycle the Citoid response. So we're going to use a selection of the type. Let me write this down here. We're going to use a selection of the type Citoid. The Citoid selection selects a field of the Citoid response. And in this case, the configuration of this step is the field that we want to select from the Citoid response. And in this case, for the title field, we want to select the title field of the Citoid response, okay? This way. So this means that we are going to be selecting what Citoid is responding for the title field. And again, we don't want to apply any transformations here because Citoid was responding what we wanted it to respond for the title. So again, we are applying just an empty array of transformations. Let's continue with the next field. Here we could write our author first and author last arrays. And again, we have two ways to do this, because remember, we didn't want any authors for this web page. So we can just leave this empty. We can just not specify the author last and author first field names, or we can specify them and set the required flag to false. This way, I mean, we can further discuss when we should do one or the other. I think that's not within the scope of this example video. We don't want any authors here, so we will just exclude those fields from this template. Let's continue with the next field, which is the date field. So field name, date. Is this required? Yes, because if we don't find the date in another target web page that we might throw Web2Cit to translate, then that might mean that we need a separate template for this. So let's say that this field is required. If Web2Cit does not find a date in the web page, then it should fail. It should return nothing. This template should not apply. But again, if you want to know more about this, please refer to the other video. We create a procedures property, procedures. The procedures is, again, an array of procedure objects. We're going to create just one procedure, and this procedure has a selections property and a transformations property. So let's write our selections property. Again, the selections property is an array of selections, and each selection has a type property and a configuration property. So let's go to our article. This is the article again.
Maybe
we said, yeah.
I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna pause just a little bit.
Okay. You can still see my screen, right? Yeah, cool. So in this case, for the date, if we go back to our article, we see that the date is available in the HTML. It is available here. So for this case, an appropriate selection step would be the XPath selection step that lets us select nodes in the HTML based on something called an XPath expression. Again, we're not going to go into detail about this. You can find more information in the early adopters guidelines. And anyway, XPath expressions are a complete separate topic that would require a complete separate video to completely manage it, and maybe more than just one separate video. But let's show an example. If you want to find out more, just check the guidelines. So in this case, let's go back. Let's say that the selection step we want to use is the XPath expression, and the configuration of the XPath selection step is an XPath expression. So we go to the article and
maybe just like to make it clear in the YAML, is that the article that Diego selected in a way is showing you the 3 different selection types that you can have, right? Because you're seeing the XPath, you're seeing the Citoid, and you're also seeing the fakes, right? And these are the 3 ones that you are allowed to use, and that's it. There are no more, but here you can see all the 3 of them.
For now, anyway, we decided to provide these basic selection steps, which we thought were going to be the most used ones. But be aware that we plan to release others relatively soon. For example, one that you can select parts of the URL, or others that you can select parts of the HTTP response, which might be appropriate for some translations as well. But for now, as Evelyn said, we have just those 3, Citoid, XPath, and fixed. So again, in this case, the configuration is the XPath expression to the node that we want to select. And for this, we can use the browser's inspector, which you can open with F12 in most browsers. I'm using Firefox right now. So in this case, to get the XPath expression, or at least one of them, because you have multiple expressions pointing to the same node usually, you would click this button here in the inspector, and you would pick the HTML, the element in the rendered display, so that it shows here what HTML node is rendering to that content. Right here, it's this one here. So if we right-click on it, and if we choose copy, it's going to give us the option to copy the XPath expression to that node. And actually, I have installed, I have copied that to the clipboard. I have installed an add-on that I'm going to open it now. And it lets me enter an XPath, which I will enter here. This is the XPath that has just been copied. And it lets me test if the XPath is actually selecting the node that I expected. So I click here to execute it, and successfully it is selecting this node, which is the one that we wanted. So we could just go to the YAML file here and copy that XPath. Now, and this is part of what I said about XPath expressions not being like the simplest topic on earth, this path is relatively weak because it is very specific. So it is telling us that it has to go to the top HTML element, it has to find the body element inside it, then it goes to the 5th div element, and inside it, it will find a section element, and it will go to the 3rd div element, and so on. And this might break.
And I'm actually thinking whether if they are consistent or not inside the same newspaper, if we open any other
exactly.
Yeah.
It might be that if you write this for this template, it's going to be useful just for that template. And we actually want templates to be an example of how to translate other web pages in the same domain. So it might work, but it might also not work. It might be a relatively weak expression. If you are good at XPath, or you want to study a little bit more about XPaths, you might find better expressions. Actually, these expressions, we found them going to the inspector, but when we have the visual editor is going to suggest some of these expressions for you. Like you won't have to actually open the inspector. You will be able to just click on the element that you want, and the visual editor is going to suggest an expression for you.
Yeah, and
But again,
when just in case someone is watching this video without having seen the previous video, when Diego is talking about the visual editor, he's referring not to the visual editor of Wikipedia, he's referring to the visual editor of Web2Cit, because remember that this is only for early adopters. So if you don't consider yourself like technically skilled enough to go through all these steps, then just wait for the release of the visual editor of Web2Cit.
exactly.
do
Or
not
as
think
Evelyn said,
do not think that Web2Cit is going to work this way.
exactly. And as Evelyn said, if you cannot wait until the editor is ready, you can also help us with a list of problematic URLs, which is a way of telling us which URLs you're having trouble with, so that somebody that maybe is trying to adopt this early can translate those that spreadsheet into actual templates. So even with a visual editor, it might be that the expression is not perfect, that it might be improved, because as I said, multiple XPath expressions can be pointed to the same node, so you will be able to customize it. So if we go again to the inspector, and again, we point to the node we're interested in.
Can you zoom
More?
zoom a little? Yeah, there is better. Yeah, no, it's better.
Okay. We see that this node is a P node, that is a paragraph node that has a special attribute in it. It has a class attribute with a fecha property. So we can rephrase the XPath, we can change it, and we can make it like this. I'm going to open this add-on that I had downloaded. I'm going to actually erase what we had before so that we clear the execution result. So we can rephrase that as this. We want any P node, wherever in the tree, that has a class attribute with a fecha value. Yeah, again, this is very specific to XPath. I'm not going to explain this in detail. If you want to know more about XPath, go to the Early Adopters Guideline and you will find some resources there. So if I execute this XPath, we can verify that it's also selecting the node that we expected. And probably this XPath is much more robust because it's not so specific. It doesn't specifically tell me the exact route to the node because that route might change in a separate web page. It is more general. It is telling us select a node that has a class attribute with a fecha value. And probably that's not going to change in other web pages of the same domain. So probably this XPath is more robust. We're going to use that in our YAML configuration file. So the output of this selection step is not going to be, it's not going to be the date alone. It's actually going to be all this string. And this string is not in the format that we expect it to be. Remember that we wanted it to be 4 digits for the year, followed by a dash, 2 for the month, followed by a dash, 2 for the date. So we have to transform this selection output into an output that is valid for the date field. We have several transformation steps available. They are all available in the Early Adopters Guideline. We plan to have, it's here. We plan to have more available soon. And again, with a selection output, there might be multiple paths to get to the output as we want it. I'm going to show just one possible way now. So first thing I will do is I will use a split transformation. The split transformation takes a string and splits it at a specified delimiter. So in this case, our string, we're going to split it in 2. And we're going to split it wherever Web2Cit finds the expression a las, which in Spanish means at. So we always expect that our web pages in this El Observador domain will show the date first, then at, a las in Spanish, and the hour, the time. Yeah. So we're going to use a las as a delimiter. Let's go to our YAML again. Here we have our transformations property. We are going to write our first transformation. Yeah, this is going to be transformation step number 1. And transformation steps have 3 properties. They have a type property, they have an item-wise property, and they have a configuration config property. Type is split. We are using the split transformation. Item-wise, we tried to give an explanation of this in the separate video. It's a relatively complicated topic. We're gonna, we have some ideas for this. We're gonna make it optional, so you don't have to decide what to put here. As a rule of thumb, you will usually use item-wise true. But if you're having trouble with it, or you want to find out more, please read the information in the early adopters guideline. For now, usually with true, you're gonna be okay. And the configuration for the split transformation step is the delimiter. In our case, las, okay? We can write this with or without double quotes. It doesn't matter in YAML. This is the first transformation step. This is gonna give us a new output. It's gonna give us a list of choose strings. The first string is gonna be this part, and the second string is gonna be this part. Of these two strings, we want the first one. We're not interested in the time. We're just interested in the date. So to select, to keep only the first part, we're going to use a second transformation step. We're going to use our range transformation step. The range transformation step, it is explained in detail again in the early adopter guideline. Let's go there. It says the range transformation selects one or more items or ranges of items and return them in the order specified. Doesn't matter here. We have different ways how to specify this configuration. What we want the range transformation step to do now is to select just the first item of the array that we gave it as input. And because the range transformation step works the first item for the range transformation step is item 0. Yeah, we might change this if it is requested, but what we're telling the range transformation step with this configuration is that we want to keep the first item that we gave it, which in our case is the date. And because we wanted this 0 to be a string, then we have to force, we don't want it to be taken as a number. We want it to be taken as a string. Then we have to include these double quotation marks at the beginning and at the end. Sorry, that was too much information. We will use double quotation marks because the configuration has to be a string, and otherwise it might be interpreted as a number. So these are mandatory. And what this is telling the range transformation step is that we want to keep the first item that was our date. And finally, because at this point, the result of the series of transformations would be this string here. But still, this string does not have the format that we expected. We wanted it to be 2022-01-14. So for that, we will use a special transformation step, which is the date transformation step. So in this case, it's a date transformation step. Again, as a rule of thumb, item-wise is going to be true. And the configuration of the date transformation step, what does this step do? It takes a natural language date and it converts it to the format that we want. So the configuration for this step is we tell it the language in which we are giving it the date in natural language. And because this is a Spanish newspaper, we will use ES to denote Spanish. So what this step is going to do is going to take this string. We are telling it that it is in Spanish. So it's going to apply some internal logic, and it's going to try to convert this string into a date in the format that we want. And this uses a separate library, which is quite good. So it doesn't have to be in this exact format. It can be like, for example, 14 January 2022 without the articles in between, the prepositions in between. I mean, you can try. In some cases, in most cases, it will work. Maybe in some cases it won't, but it's quite good. And that's it for our, yeah.
And you might be wondering why to go for all this trouble for something as the date, right? And so I think this is like the good thing that we need to understand about like why Web2Cit in a way is because imagine that, you know, this requires some time to actually put together. And we expect that the visual editor of Web2Cit will make all this easier. But when you come to think about it, whenever you have to add a citation from El Observador or any other newspaper, you have to manually change the date every single time for every citation. But by doing this, you won't need to do it anymore. You will just grab the information from Web2Cit and be like, oh, you know, now it will be transforming this problem that I'm having, right? And particularly for some of this information, it's actually quite important to get the date, right? Because in this case, you are citing a newspaper article that has a lot of contextual data about the event that is happening. So you actually want to recover the date in which the article was published. It's not like a minor feature of the date that you are adding here. So yeah.
Yeah, and actually, I understand this is a little complicated, but parsing a date in natural language is definitely not something easy to do. And I think one of the advantages of using Web2Cit here is that we can use these third-party libraries, like in this case, as it is explained in the early adopters guideline, the date transformation is using the Sugar library, because it's relatively easy to create new transformation steps. If we think that this is not working as expected, it is, I mean, this is not for all end users, but we can have discussions in Fabricator, and we can create separate transformation steps that are specific for our use cases in the Wikimedia community. So like let's imagine that we want to make a better date transformation step, or let's imagine that we want to create a separate date transformation step, or even as it was suggested in a previous meeting of our advisory board, let's imagine that we want to have a custom transformation step that users can define right in their own JavaScript code. We can do that, not now, but we will be able to do it soon because of the way how Web2Cit has been designed. It is really easy to create new transformation steps, as well as new selection steps. Okay, so that's it for our date field. Let's not get lost here. This is a disadvantage of YAML. Actually, it's written in our early adopters guidelines. Sometimes it is not so clear where we have left the indentation before. Like that's why we are given the option. It's like YAML is good, but it's not always the best. It's like, okay, we had this amount of spaces. Let's here. All right. So next field and last one, we are gonna go with field name published in. Again, if you want to know what field names we support, this is all available in the guidelines. Whether this is a required or not, we're gonna say this is required. Again, if you want to know more about it, please watch the video. And we include here the array of procedures. We're going to include just one procedure, which has a selections property and a transformations property. And here, just as we had with the title field, Citoid is returning, apparently it is returning the published in field correctly. Yeah, we're not having trouble with it. So for this, we will just select the Citoid response. So the type of the selection is going to be Citoid again, and the configuration. Well, there in the early adopters, we have more information about it. We should see how Citoid is returning this information in what field. Let me go to that part of the early adopters guidelines so you know where to find it. It's the Citoid selection, and here you can see, you can check what Citoid returns for a given URL using the citation endpoint of the Wikimedia REST API. Again, you don't have to always do this. Let me just show you very quickly. how to use it. But again, it's not the aim of this example video. So here we go to this citation endpoint. We're gonna use it here. I just have to enter the URL of the article. I'm doing this very fast, I know, because it's not the scope of the video. I'm gonna run it here. Actually, sorry, I should change this. As explained in guidelines, I should change this to media wiki base fields. So here I have the response of Citoid. Then the Wikipedia automatic generator takes this and creates a citation. But also El Observador, we see here that is being returned in the publication title field. So this is what we should enter as a configuration of Citoid. Anyway, like I said that very quickly, publication title is usually the field where Citoid returns the published in information. There are some exceptions. If you go with publication title, you should usually be okay. And again, when the visual editor is implemented, you won't have to deal with this because the visual editor is going to offer you by default, like, okay, if I'm working on the published in field now, then this is the Citoid field where usually the published in field information is available, which is the publication title field. Because we're working on the plain configuration files, it is more versatile. Like we could actually here take the title response of Citoid for the published in field. That's probably something you don't want to do, but in some cases you might. In some cases, Citoid might be confusing one field for another, and we might use the configuration files to switch this around. But again, these are very specific use cases. Again, like manually editing these files is complicated, but it also brings lots of power. Anyway, I'm not gonna get into more details here.
And we don't want to remember that with a lot of power comes great responsibility. So,
yeah,
the most quoted quote from Spider-Man. So you should also be aware that if you're gonna like exercise that power, then it means that you know what you're doing.
Yeah, and also you can watch Spider-Man, like a third attached resource here. And again, the transformations, we don't want to apply any transformation here because the selection is already outputting a valid output for this field. So that's it. I think we are okay with what we have. Here we have the JSON output, and here comes, like, let's see if the JSON output is okay. Let's see if it validates, again, the JSON schema. So we go back to our early adopter guidelines.
And please remember that while you're doing all that, do not accidentally close the tab because you will lose all the stuff that you've written. And so,
but I think this one tool specifically, onlineyamltools.com, I just found this like with a very fast Google search. I don't know if this is the best tool. This is something to get started with, but maybe you'll find something that's better. I've closed the tab.
Yeah, you can save
it, right? Yeah, but if you reopen it, apparently everything's there in its side. It doesn't get erased. So that's we can try it, but let's just in case, let's copy it first. So I'm copying this, and I'm sorry, I'm not copying that. I'm going to the early adopters guideline. I'm going to templates.json section. Here we can find the schema, just as we found the schema. Just as we found the schema for the tests configuration file. This one's longer because the schema for the templates.json is much more complicated. We just copy this. We go to our validator. We copy the schema in the left side of the validator tool. And in the right side, we want to paste what we've written with the YAML to JSON converter. Let's copy this and let's paste it here. We have some trouble. Let's see what we have. So apparently it says that there is an object that is missing a transformations and a selections property. This should be a procedures. So apparently we have a procedures that is missing these properties. Let's see what happened. Let's check. So we have here fields procedures. We have selections and transformations here. That's okay. We have these other procedures, which is an array of procedures objects with a selection and transformations. Oh, here we have the error here. Required properties are missing from objects. Oh yeah, I made the mistake that is the most common mistake that you can make when working with YAML here. Let's go and see what happened. I mean, it's here. So here is the procedures array for the field name date. Remember that the procedures array.
Can you actually try to see if you can locate it in the JSON output?
Yeah.
No, because that you have the bar there, and so the bar right now on the JSON output is like at the top.
Oh, okay, here.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you, Evelyn.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So here we have the procedures array. It's here in the JSON. Here's the array. Here it starts. And the procedures array includes a series of procedure objects. Yeah. And each procedure object should have two properties: selections and transformations. And in YAML, you declare a new object in an array with this dash. So for example, let's see one that was okay. Here we have a procedures. Here we have our first procedures object, which has two properties: selections and transformations. But see what I did here. It was wrong. It was a mistake. I have my procedures with a selections property, but when I wrote the transformations property, I created a new procedure because I included this dash here. Yeah. So in the JSON, here we have a procedure with a selections object. This procedure is missing a transformations object. And here we have another procedure up to here with a transformations object. And this one is missing the selections object. Yeah, this is not what I meant. I shouldn't have put this here. Yeah. Now, if I switch to the right here, and here the procedure, which is this object here, has a selections property and a transformations property. Okay. So if I copy this to the validator, voila, now it's working. Yeah, this was something that I was gonna say, but I said, no, maybe this is too complicated to explain right now. Well, luckily it appeared. This is the most common mistake, at least when I've been editing these YAML files. This is the mistake I always stumble upon. I always write selections dash transformations, and that creates two objects, and that's not okay. So the validation has passed. I'm gonna copy this to our templates.json file in the path that corresponds to www.elobservador.com.ui. And I'm going to do that within our, syntax highlight tags here. Okay, here we are. We publish. Okay, so now, if everything has worked correctly, we can, let's go back to our slides. We go back to slides. It says, write a template for the target URL until all tests pass. Currently, we don't have a way to see if the tests pass. I mean, when I mean tests that pass, we mean that the tests.json file we wrote before, it's not this one, it's the other one. It means that those tests are passing. Web2Cit, we currently don't have a way to check that. As I said before, we will in the future, but not now. For now, we just can check if Web2Cit is returning what we wanted to return. So we can go to our, I'm going to open a new tab. We can go to our translation server address, web2cit.toolforge.org, and we can append the URL that we're trying to translate with Web2Cit. If it is working, and now this might not work, okay. Oh well, this is when it is not working, okay. And now we can pause the video a little bit, scan, just let me, because this might take a little time. Okay, so we found actually a problem here, because we see here that we are not getting the results that we are expecting. Actually, for none of the fields. Actually, we are still seeing the Citoid response for this URL. So we stopped the video a little bit. I went, so we were not debugging actually this together. I went and debugged this on my own. you would be able to debug this on your own as soon as we have the debug endpoint that we are planning until we have the visual editor. We have discussed this in the separate video. In the debug endpoint, you will be able to see the output of every step. Like, what was the output of the selection step for the item type field? What was the output for the second transformation step for the date field? And that way, you will be able to see where things went wrong. So let me very quickly show you what I did to debug this, even though we don't still have the debug endpoint. So we go to the configuration file. Let's edit this file again. I had some suspicions anyway. I thought that maybe it was the transformation steps for the date field that was going wrong for some reason. So what I did was, in the field name date, I set this field to false. That means that even if this fails, the template will still apply and Web2Cit will still return a translation using this template. So I publish the changes to meta and I refresh the Web2Cit page. Let's see what happens now. Now we see that for the item type, we get newspaper article. So yes, now the template is applying for this web page, but we're not getting an output for date. So this confirms that date is failing for some reason. So because it is failing, we don't get it in the output, but because we set it to not required, that does not make the whole template fail, just the date. So you will be able to see what's failing specifically when we have the debug endpoint. That's what I did while the video was stopped. But specifically, the problem is that one of the transformation steps, specifically the range transformation step, does not follow the rule of thumb for the item-wise property. If you want to know more about the item-wise property, you can go to the early adopter guideline, or you can watch the separate video. We have, as I said, a separate fabricator task so that if you don't know what to put there, you can just leave it unset and we will choose a default value for you. So when this task is addressed, this is going to be solved. But for the range transformation step, the default value should be false. Yeah, I'm not going to go into detail why this is like this. There might be some cases where you want to set this to true, but you would usually want it to be set as false. Because this was set to true, the series of transformations was failed. So I'm going to edit this. Let's go to the date field name. Let's switch this back to required true. And let's change the item-wise property of the range transformation to false, which is the default value. And by the way, I'm going to write some notes for me here. I'm going to, in the guidelines, I'm going to write down what the default value should be for the item-wise property for the different transformation step types, so that you know what to write there until we have the fabricator task addressed in guide. I'm going to just make my notes here. Okay, so let's save the page once more, the configuration file. And now we go to Web2Cit, the Web2Cit translation server. We update, we refresh, sorry, the results. And here we are. So we get the item type, we get what we wanted. We get newspaper article. The title, we get what we wanted, which was just the Citoid output. We don't get anything for authors. That's what we wanted as well. We get the date in the format that we wanted, year, month, date. We get the publication title, which is the published in field. We get it in what we wanted, which was the Citoid response anyway. We get this two here. I'm not going to go into detail about this. We have a fabricator task about this as well. It has to do with how Zotero and Citoid manage the published, where we should map the published in field to. This is because Zotero includes the published in information, not only in the publication title, but also in a couple more fields. But let's not get into this. If you want to know more about it, you can check the fabricator task we have about it. And there is a very interesting thing as well, which is that the URL field is not the modified URL with web2cit.toolforge.org at the beginning, but this is the canonical URL, which is the original URL for the results. And as we explained in the separate video, not only do we have the results written like this, which is actually not the best format, this is just preliminary, but what is very important is that we have this information embedded in the web page, which means that we can just go ahead and import this to Zotero, for example, or more relevant to our case, if we go to the Wikipedia sandbox and we enter the URL with the Web2Cit ToolForge server address prepend, and we generate the citation automatically, then this time the information should be correct. Let's hold on. Okay, here we are. No authors. The title is okay. We have the published in right. We have the publication date this time. If we just insert it, then it's gonna insert the citation as it would regularly do with any citation included with the automatic generator. Here we have.
That will also work for all the elobservador.com OE pages.
Great point. It should. As long as, I mean, we are going to try it.
Let's try it.
Let's try it. Like, oh, this is not tested. This could fail. Okay, so let's choose another article. At least let's try and see.
And also, I have a question. While you search for another article, so right now it's doing that. It's actually accepting the date format that the English community works with. But what about the Wikipedia, like the Spanish Wikipedia? Because Spanish Wikipedia uses a different date format. Just FYI.
A different what, sorry?
A different date format.
Oh, but that doesn't matter because I mean the format how we express the date must always be 2022. Year, month, date. But then how the citation generator formats it, that depends on Wikipedia. So if we let's try this.
Can we see it? So let's go.
We can. We can. Let's open
go to your sandbox.
We go to
Spanish Wikipedia.
Zona de pruebas, right?
Yeah. I think it's called.
How is it called?
Taller.
Okay.
Or you can go to.
No, but Zona de pruebas is working as well. Let's try Zona de pruebas, which is the one I already have here. We can try this one, I guess. But we are not, anyway, we're not going to save the page, so it doesn't matter. Oh, but I'm sorry, I'm not like the best Wikipedia editor on earth. Definitely maybe the worst.
Well,
I don't know how to open the visual editor here. Taller?
Then go to Taller, anda Taller. Go to Taller. No, you have it right there on the top of the.
Okay.
This is go back to Wikipedia. Go back to.
Okay, here we are. Yeah, okay,
so,
here.
Yeah, there.
Thank you. You're showing everyone how bad a Wikipedia editor I am. Okay, look, I've used it before, apparently. Okay, so
and also, just in case you don't know, whenever you want to change from code and you don't have you want to change from code to visual editor, you just can force it where it says. See on the URL where it says equal edit and it says BE action. So that means visual editor. And so whenever you're on code mode, it says action. And then if you add the BE, it just forces it on every page. So
well, very useful. Thanks. Thank you. I didn't know that.
This is my part of the tutorial. Okay, so
yeah, you're definitely my source for Wikipedia. No doubt about it. So I'm clicking here citar, which means cite in Spanish. I copy the URL. No, this is not the URL. Let's try it now. Let's do step by step. Let's try the URL that we tried already that was working. Here it is. Okay, where is my Taller? Here. Okay, so we enter the URL. Of course, we have to prepend the Web2Cit translation server address. Just 1 second. Here it is. And here the format is in Spanish. Okay, because it doesn't matter. Success, absolutely. Bravo. Yeah, yeah, very good. Okay, and now the second challenge. We go to our Wikipedia sandbox and we enter a new citation. And in this case, we enter a new article of the El Observador. And according to what we explained about Web2Cit in the separate video, like the Web2Cit, like the general overview, we throw this URL to Web2Cit. Web2Cit first checks what domain it belongs to. Then it gets the configuration files for that domain. It gets all of the templates for that domain. And then first it checks if you have URL path, URL path patterns. Then it checks all the templates for the same pattern. It tries them by one until it finds one that applies. In our case, we just have one template. We have no patterns for this URL. So Web2Cit should try the template that we have just configured for the other URL to try and translate this URL. And if it applies, it should return a citation. So let's try it. We're going to try this directly here. We could also try it in the Web2Cit server web page. But let's try it here. Web2Cit toolforge.org. I'm nervous. It worked again.
It worked again. Oh wow!
It worked again. Yeah, bravo. Yeah, cool. Yeah, this is working as expected. Thank you for bringing this question. Cool. I'm happy anyway. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess that so to make things a little bit more spicy, if you go to the the main page of El Observador, you probably have some articles there that actually have author name that won't retrieve the right name. So let's go to the main page. And if you like scroll, they have some opinion articles.
Okay, down below.
Not that.
Not that down.
Opinion.
Okay. Oh, here.
Yeah, there.
Well,
so those articles, yeah.
Yeah, they have an author name. So here we have two options. Maybe when we give this, let's just give it to the web page of the translator. When we give this to the translator, maybe the template applies anyway. So it's going to return something, but of course, it's not going to include an author name. But maybe the format is completely different, so the template does not apply. So the fallback template is going to apply, and we're just going to get the cited results. Let's see what happens first.
I don't think that Citoid gets the names, though.
Okay, so here, the template applied, and I know that because we are getting newspaper article here, and if this was Citoid, probably we were getting web page here, and of course we're not getting any authors here. So what would be the workflow? Then we go back to our presentation. We are finding step number one. We're finding a page that is returning unexpected results in Citoid. Yeah, because we haven't tried that, but probably Citoid is returning unexpected results. We are also seeing that Web2Cit is returning unexpected results. So the third step would be we write a test for this URL. And in this test, we would include the author name, because in this case, we do want the author name. And because the template that we have is going to fail that test, because the template is not going to return an author name, then that would signal that we need a new template. Yeah. So we would we create a new template with this web page that we identified. And once we created the template, the test would pass. That's not something that is going to work right now, but we know it would pass. Then in the future, Web2Cit will support tests, and it's going to tell us that it's passing. And that template should now apply for all web pages in El Observador that have an author.
Yeah, but so also it's also good that we are showing this, because this is where you can see like kind of the good idea that Web2Cit is, in the sense that you have like at least 3/4 of the template already written with the first test that you've done, and this is only adding the author last and author first name.
Yeah, and what's more, I mean, maybe you can try these things when we have, for example, the sandbox endpoint implemented, and when we have the visual editor. Maybe you don't need a separate template. Maybe you can add the author field to the template that we just created, but make that field not required. So the template is not going to fail if it doesn't find an author, but it's going to return an author if it does find it. Yeah, you will see when one option is better than the other as we continue using the tool. Actually, not even me know which would be the best solution in each case. That's something that we will together discover as we use the tool. And sorry, so to end with this presentation, just the last slide. How do we continue with this? How do you help us test this? So we have the list of problematic URLs that we mentioned before. You can get examples of URLs that other users have identified that are failing with Citoid, and you can use those to write the tests and the templates. And if you need, you can also write URL path patterns. Second resource, because writing XPaths might be a little complicated, as I said before, that in the browser shows you an XPath that might not be optimal because maybe it's weak. Well, Andrew Lee has already started some experiments with XPaths. He has created this spreadsheet where for some URLs, he has written the XPath to different, oh, sorry, I'm going to zoom in, for different fields, like for the author, for the title, for the publication, and for the date. He has written some XPaths that are probably more robust than those that you would get with the browser. So you can use this, you can start translating this spreadsheet that Andrew Lee and his team created into actual templates of Web2Cit, and you don't have to find out what would be the XPath. You already have the XPath here. Somebody else did the work for you. Of course, maybe in some cases you don't need them because, for example, I don't know, for example, for this newspaper article.
I'm under the impression that you should have mentioned this at the beginning of this conversation rather at the end of it.
Before mentioning XPath. But anyway, I mean, for this article, it might be that the title is okay with Citoid, so you don't have to deal with XPaths. Just use the Citoid selection step because Citoid is working okay. But then, for example, for the publication, you might need XPath. Then you can just use the XPath expression that has been written in the spreadsheet. And finally, please, because this is, we haven't thoroughly tested this yet. I mean, this is still preliminary. There are some things to improve. For example, one thing that I can think of, if you go to the server, translation server, without including a URL, one would expect to get a nice landing page, but you get actually an error. That's something that we have to improve. This was released relatively quickly so that we could start testing this. But we still have, we still probably have some bugs. So if you find these bugs, please do report them. That's going to help us a lot. And to report that, we are tracking our tasks in Fabricator. We have separate tags, separate projects. You have the Web2Cit core tag for issues relating to the Web2Cit core library, and Web2Cit server tag for issues relating to the server library, to server code base, sorry. But probably you won't know to which project this should be, which tag you should include. In those cases, if you're not unsure, you can just use the generic Web2Cit tag, and then when we review the tasks, we will give them the right project tag. But let me show you how this looks like. If I go to this tag, we are gonna be, we will see that the tasks that are open for Web2Cit. You can create a new task. Here, for example, you can add a new task or a new bug report. And as I said, you can also do that for specific sub-projects. And you can also see what are the tasks that are open for those sub-projects. So for example, these are the tasks that are currently open for the Web2Cit core sub-project. And for example, one of them is this one, the one that we mentioned before. Consider supporting JSON5 and YAML configuration files natively. This is so that you don't have to convert YAML to JSON and then save JSON format. Maybe you can just save it directly to YAML. You can, if you want to check what tasks are open and you want to add your comments to those tasks, please feel welcome to do so. And that's it. I don't know, Evelyn, if you want to add something.
No, I think this is fine. I think that I hope that people feel enthusiasm. It looks harder than it actually is. And this is because Diego has been very thorough in his explanation. But I think once you start getting your hands dirty, you will see that it's not as complicated as it looks like. And in any case, we'll be conducting some workshops, probably in English. Well, I mean, in English for sure, and we might try to do in Spanish if there's anyone from the Spanish-speaking community that is interested. But in any case, watch out for those because we'll let you know through your user pages and other forums to let you know that the workshops are happening.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
feel
remember to
free
check.
to ask.
Yeah, also remember to check the Web2Cit page because we're gonna paste everything there. We are gonna paste the recording of this video, which is kind of like circular in a way because if you are watching this video, you probably like go to the video somehow, right? But I mean the problematic URLs, the early guide, early adopters guidelines, and the presentation, the slideshow will be all pasted there.
Yeah, again, like please always take into account that first, this is gonna be way easier when we have the visual editor implemented, way easier. We just didn't want to wait until that was ready for you to start testing it if you wanted to delve into manually editing configuration files, because the visual editor might take a couple months more, and we wanted to make sure this was available as soon as possible. That on the one hand. Also be aware that I understand that right now with just the regular Web2Cit translation endpoint, some debugging is going to be complicated, but I expect to implement the debug endpoint and the sandbox endpoint, which I think are going to be useful. The debug endpoint so that you can check where a translation might be failing, and that's crucial. I understand that you cannot do it right now with the resources you have. And unless you install the core library, which is a completely separate topic, and the sandbox endpoint, which would be useful to deal with the configuration files and try them and test configurations without changing translation for everyone using Web2Cit. And only when you have found something that you're happy with, then you can move to the main space. Those two endpoints are planned. I hope I can implement them soon. If you want to add your comments, the task is open in Fabricator in the Web2Cit server tab. Okay, well, so thank you very much. Thank you very much for following this far if you got here. And thank you, everyone, as well.
Okay, see you all in the next edition of Web2Cit. Bye.